In this video, I'm going to be making a wooden bucket, and in the process, I'm going to show you a few ways that you probably shouldn't use your miter saw. So to start, I bought this pine wood panel, which is not a very good wood for making a bucket, not very waterproof, but it was cheap, and I was not confident that this project would work, so I didn't want to waste too much money on nice wood. So I guess this will be more of a prop bucket. Okay, so I just cut up that panel and now I'm just gonna glue it all back together again. But this time I am going to glue it up with the grain direction switched the other way. And I'm doing that because this panel is going to make the staves or sides of the bucket, and I want to make sure that the grain direction is going the right way on these staves, you know, vertically up and down. So now to cut the staves of the bucket, and this is going to be the most challenging part of the project because a bucket is not only round, but it's also tapered in towards the bottom, which means that each of the staves are angled in two directions, which would usually mean I would have to deal with compound angles, which I do not want to do. Compound angles make no sense to me, and they are a nightmare to work with. So my way around that is I'm going to nest the piece at my miter saw at the angle that I want the taper to be at. So I want the bucket to be tapered in 1.5 inches towards the bottom. So I'm using 1.5 inch strip to raise the front edge of my workpiece. And now with my piece nested, I only have to worry about one angle, which is going to have to do with the number of sides that you want on your bucket. And since I want 16 sides on my bucket, that means that I need to set my miter saw to 11.25 degrees. So you can see here, by having my workpiece nested, I was able to cut the angle and the taper at the same time on all these staves. So next, I need to cut a little groove in each of the staves to hold the bottom of the bucket. And I'm going to do this at the miter saw as well, but before I can get started cutting those, I need to slightly adjust the angle of my miter saw to adjust for the taper of each stave and make the blade parallel with the bottom of the staves. I'm also going to switch out the blade on my miter saw for a 7.25 inch blade, and I'm doing this because I'm going to cut the bottom of the bucket later to the exact same size. So by using this blade, it will add a slight curve to the bottom of each groove to perfectly fit the bucket bottom. Okay, one last thing before I cut these grooves. I again need to nest each of these stave pieces, again with a 1.5 inch block, to adjust for the taper. So this next step was not exactly necessary, but I think it made a step later on in the project a lot easier, and that is to cut a few slots in each of the staves to make lining up the rope rings later a lot easier. Also, for this step of the project, in retrospect, I really should have just used my table saw with a dado stack. That would have been faster rather than using just multiple cuts with multiple stop blocks like I did here. But at this point, I was using my miter saw so much that I just didn't even think about it. The staves are all done now, and now I'm just going to glue all of them together. And there's not really a great way to clamp or nail these together at the moment, so I'm just going to put a staple in the top and bottom of each of these while the glue dries, and then once the glue dries, I can take them out. So usually when gluing up something cylindrical like this, I'll glue up the project in two halves, and then if my angles are off a little bit, which they usually are if I'm doing it, at that point when the two halves are glued up, I can just sand the two halves flat, and then I can glue those halves together and get a nice joint. But in this particular case, I must have got lucky because the two halves fit together almost perfectly with no sanding, which was nice. Before I glue the two halves together, I need to fit in the bottom of the bucket, And like I said earlier, I'm going to cut the bottom of the bucket to the same size as the blade that I used earlier. It's going to be 7¼ inch in diameter. You can see here, I ended up sanding it down just a little bit so that the fit wasn't so tight and difficult to deal with. But you can see here that groove that I cut, once all the pieces are together, is pretty much circular. It's not like you don't see a lot of edges. It'll perfectly fit in that bucket bottom. I don't know what to call this part of the bucket, but I'm making a couple of somethings to hold the handle in place, to attach the handle to the actual bucket. I decided to go for more of a rustic look with this bucket, so I'm adding some dents to it. I didn't show it. I also carved out each of the joint lines between each of the staves so that you could see each of the staves a little bit more independently. I'm also adding this dark old brown colored stain to the bucket, which I thought looked really good going on, but it dried a little bit darker than I would have liked. Now I got to attach the rope rings, and I'm just going to do that with hot glue. Originally, I was going to try to staple these into place, but the staples were too visible, so I'm just going to go with hot glue. And those grooves that I cut earlier make lining up the rope a lot easier. Last part of the bucket, I need to make the handle, and I decided I'd make the handle nice. So instead of using pine, I'm going to use cherry, and I'm cutting out a bunch of circles with this hole saw bit. And I've said this before about cutting out circles with the hole saw bit. I will only cut halfway through the piece, and then I'll flip it and then cut the other half. And I do that because that way when the circles come out, they don't get stuck all the way in the hole saw bit. They're easy to take out. So I have all these little hole saw cores pieces, and I'm gonna fit a dowel down the center and to line them up, and I'm just gonna glue them all together. And I'm paying attention to the grain direction of each of these little circles, and I'm alternating every other one, horizontal, vertical, which will make this dowel strong, but it also looks a lot better, I think. So this cherry wood dowel that I made is way longer than what I need just to make a small handle. But I did this, made it so long so that I can keep my fingers further away from the blade during this process. But that also means with such a long dowel that I can cut a few different handles from the same piece. So I'm going to try out a couple of different designs. So I have the depth stop of my miter saw set. I also have the blade locked in position so that it doesn't slide. So it stays in the same spot. And then I'm just changing the angle of the miter saw depending on how wide I want the cove to be. So right now I'm cutting a really wide cove I'm bringing the saw all the way out to its max 60 degrees. And then for the other handle, I think I only brought the miter saw out to 30 degrees because I wanted each of the coves to be a lot more narrow. Let me know in the comments which handle you like better. I really liked them both, and I actually had a hard time deciding which handle I wanted to use on the bucket. Luckily, the decision was made pretty easy for me because I ended up breaking one of the handles trying to drill through it. So I ended up just going with the other handle, the one with the 4 coves. Now for another completely unnecessary step, and that is I'm going to add a piece of wire to the middle of this rope for the handle. And I'm doing that so that the rope is more rigid and can stand up on its own. And I'm only doing this because I need to make a thumbnail for this video, and I want to be able to position the rope and adjust it however I need for the pictures. Now I just got to put everything together. I got to put the handle onto the rope, attach the rope to the bucket with some twine. If you made it this far in the video, first off, thank you very much. When people watch the whole video, it helps me out a ton. It helps the video get out to more people. So if you made it this far, here's a secret message for you. I do not need this bucket. I just made it because I thought it'd be a fun project. But if you want or need a bucket for whatever reason, this bucket is going to be free on my Etsy, as long as you're willing to pay for shipping. But that probably shouldn't be too much. My Etsy is in the description of this video, and I do plan on doing some more giveaways in the near future, so stay tuned for that. I will probably be doing the future giveaways through Etsy again. I tried doing a giveaway a few months ago with those pens through my website, and it did not go super easily. I did give away all the pens to 5 people, but my website was very glitchy. So I'm going to do these through Etsy, at least for a while, until I get a more functional website. But anyways, thanks for watching, and I hope you like the bucket.